We tried FSD Beta 12 in LA for the first time last night. So my dad was bugging me. He's like, "You got to come down here. I really want to try FSD Beta 12, go for a ride." And so we went for our first ride yesterday. There's like this crazy storm in LA right now that's been lasting for days. And they're like, "Don't leave, you might die or whatever." But it was a little bit lighter yesterday, so we went around and did 3 drives, and they were all zero intervention. And um, there were some pretty impressive moments in there that kind of surprised him. Like, he lives in a gated community, so FSD could never get out of the gate properly because it's motion sensitive. You have to kind of creep forward to get it to open. So it would kind of get stuck, and then it would try and like go. The path planner would flicker, and it would try and drive down the wrong side out the other gate. Like it's kind of confusing, like kind of an edge case scenario. But it just did it perfectly, and it made like a U-turn. It made a U-turn in the Best Buy parking lot. It like changed lanes over multiple lanes. About 30 minutes of driving, all in the rain and no interventions. So that's pretty encouraging. I wasn't sure if I'd see like a huge drop off in performance in the LA area compared to San Francisco, but I didn't see that on that drive. And the nag seemed to be much more frequent here in the LA area. It could be potentially because of the speed. Maybe San Francisco's, lower speed compared to you probably drive twice the speed on average in LA. But it could also be because they're less certain about the LA area, so they have higher sort of nag frequency there. But overall, it was a really good drive. The video is pinned up to my X profile and on my YouTube.
Thank you. I see Wes in the crowd if he wants to come up and ask Omar questions about his experience of FSD V12 in LA. That's what we're discussing right now.
Oh, and at the
Omar,
end, we went to Target and it parked at the end. So that was the third time I've seen it park at the end.
that's awesome. Um, how much of a drop did you see in performance for V11 from San Francisco to LA?
I would say they're both really good, San Francisco and LA, even on V11.
Okay. So V11 is really good. V12 is really good. No apparent difference in performance for FSD V12 from San Francisco to LA. And what was the total length of the time that you drove, Omar?
About half an hour.
Half an hour, comprised of 3 trips. Wes,
No
welcome.
safety
Yeah.
critical disengagements yet, no interventions. So that's a good sign.
Okay, that's really good. And how long are you staying in Los Angeles? Are you going to be doing some
I'll
more
be
rides
here
there?
until like Thursday or Friday, so I'll do a few more drives.
Okay, great. Wes, how are you? How is your day going?
Hey, good. I'm in the middle of painting, so I can only speak for a second.
Yeah, that sounds good. So Omar just did 3 rides, a total of half hour in Los Angeles. What questions would you like to ask him?
They looked really good. At least I watched the first one with your dad. I think that's the first one. That was really cool that it parked at Target. That was pretty neat. I assume you didn't see any red hands, and I didn't see a lot of hesitation. And it honestly, like, it looked better than San Francisco. I was wondering how you feel.
Well, San Francisco has more challenges than LA, definitely. Like, this is a much more suburban setting here. In San Francisco, you got a lot of tight things. You got a lot of, stop signs and traffic lights and things like that that are, like one of the bugs I was seeing was like a stop sign followed by a traffic light. That's kind of a more San Francisco thing. Whereas here in LA, it's kind of either stop signs or traffic lights, if that makes sense. So it's too early to like draw any huge conclusions. I imagine if I drive it a little more, then I might see some safety critical takeovers or interventions or other issues. But yeah, that was the first drive. So that's pretty much the only drive I've done in the LA area so far. So right now, you guys have all the information I have. You've seen everything I have for LA. But yeah, I'm probably gonna take it more into like the more dense part of LA, like drive it over to West Hollywood and through Beverly Hills and maybe even downtown LA, and try and get some more data on how it performs. Because where we live here in the South Bay, we drove through Palos Verdes and Torrance. It's much more suburban. In you know sort of north of the 10, you probably have a lot more high friction traffic, if that makes sense. A lot of density.
Any questions for Omar on V12? You're welcome to request to speak and ask questions. Omar, we have an unrelated question in the replies. Would you like to tell us a little bit more about your Tesla ad contest?
Oh yeah, so you know for I mean, do I think like ads are the difference between growing at 38% and 50%? No, I actually don't. I think maybe it could have you know maybe a couple percent, add a couple percent to growth, maybe, if well executed, but it also has a cost. So I'm not really one of the people who is like, oh my God, we need ads. But, every time the stock comes down, people are like talking about ads, even though Tesla's already running ads. But so first they said, oh, they need to run ads. Then they started running ads. Then they started saying, well, they're not the right kind of ads. And, they're not they're not good enough. So I said, okay, well, why don't we just make some ads just to kind of, you know, figure out what that would look like. And we got some creative people in the community. So I said, let's just have a contest. And whoever makes the best ad with the most number of votes will get a prize. And people can tip other video creators. If they make a video, if you like it, you can say, oh, okay, I really like that. Let me give them $5 or whatever. And then we'll just send it to Elon and the Tesla team. He follows me, Sawyer, everybody else. We have his email stuff. We'll just say, hey, look, this is the contest. And, maybe it'll inspire them. I don't know. Maybe it'll be fun. Maybe it'll just make some people feel better. Maybe the video will get out there and somebody will see it, and we can educate people about EVs. I mean, personally, I think, obviously there is a lot of FUD. As EVs have become mass market and have become affordable, they've become more of a threat. So you do see more of this FUD. You see, oh, they don't work in cold weather and you're going to be stuck charging for hours and this and that. But despite all the FUD, people are actually learning about EVs. There are, you know, more EVs sold every year, right? So every year, more EVs get sold than the last year. And Tesla says 90% of their buyers have never owned an EV or a Tesla before. So this is really what it's about, just educating everybody. I mean, people always say, so many people would love an EV if they really understood all the details. And, with any new technology, there's a phase of adoption, right? It takes time for people to learn. Everybody didn't just buy the iPhone on the first day. It was really over several years that people learned about it and made a switch. I had to make a lot of demos to people, show them what the product could do. So that's kind of the phase we're in with EVs now. I mean, just recently they've become very mass market products for the first time. With the launch of the Model 3, you saw like obviously some good sales there, but production was limited. Then you saw the pandemic, right? And during the pandemic, nobody could make cars. So the price of new and used cars shot up. So then EVs were available, but they weren't that affordable. Now, for the first time, we're out of the pandemic, Model 3 and Y are ramped, and we have availability and affordability. So there's a lot of people who would actually, their life would be a lot better if they had one of these things, but they don't understand all the details, right? And a lot of
Right.
people say, oh, they don't know how cheap it is, but it's even bigger than that. It's not that they don't know what the price is, it's that they aren't asking what the price is because they don't realize they want one. So that's what I hope we can showcase. For don't make an ad about environmental, whatever. Showcase the features of the product, the performance, the handling, the safety, the technology, the things that are actually going to make the person who's buying it um, life improve.
Good points. Machine, Omar brought up used. I know there's some discussion going on right now on X a little bit about used Tesla prices declining, accelerating a little faster, 5-6% drops in the last 30-day period. What do you make of it? Do you think this is more supply side or demand side, a confluence of factors? But what are the top 3 factors in your mind that's leading to used Tesla prices declining a little faster?
I agree based on studying used car gurus data and having been studying it for probably like 9 months now, looking back, that the trend on Tesla used car prices going down is accelerating a bit downward. And we've seen this a few times before, most notably during the fall of 2022 when everything was inflated. We have to keep that in mind that used car prices went up quite a bit in, I believe, beginning in 2021 and mostly in the first half of 2022. And so we saw that starting to decline considerably. You'd have, Model Ys going for something insane like over $70,000 and in July, and then by the end of the year, it had gone down to, I think 60 or something. So you had like $15,000 loss, and then after the price cuts in January, you had another drop, and then it steadied, and it kind of dropped a little more in July, and then it steadied, and we thought that was it. That it steadied in October, November, and now we see over December and January, it's starting to pick up the decline again. And I think Tesla in general. You want to name the top 3 reasons? Like I haven't thought through this enough, but I can give you some reasons. One is that there is the effect of interest rates. Number one, affecting affordability of cars in general, and that should affect all purchases of cars, especially more expensive cars. So that definitely had an influence on affordability, and that would cause new prices and used car prices to go down. I would say number two is the overall demand for EVs has not grown in proportion to the increase in supply in general. Um, and we've seen a lot of the FUD coming out. And I think that has something to do with it. And I think the economy, even though some parts of the economy are doing well, I think a lot of people have been pinched in terms of the rising inflation over the last few years has caused, the purchasing power of people, the residual income left to make sort of riskier purchases has gone down. And an EV to a lot of people is a little more risky than buying a gas car. And so I think overall, not just Teslas, but other EVs, we've seen prices being hurt. And I think part of that is due to this affordability outside of interest rates. And then number three, I would say is I'm not exactly sure, but with EVs, they are new vehicles. And I do believe there's more used car supply coming on, and more each year, each model that's more recent has more volume coming onto the market and coming onto the used car market. So, and we know the first year vehicles depreciate more. And so, like when you're looking at weighted averages and whatnot, there's going to be more 2023 Model Ys than 2020 on the market. And you see it in the data, like those ones are depreciating more. So I think there's going to be some depreciation, obviously anyway. So there should be some decline in used car prices. That's healthy. But what Tesla's at is considerably higher than other OEMs right now. So I don't know what to make of it in terms of obviously I personally don't think it's a good sign for even demand for new Teslas because those things are highly correlated historically. But it also may not be as bad as it seems. We know Highland is coming out, and if you, especially for Model 3, if you have a new car coming out, The demand for the older version is going to go down, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. So I think it's more nuanced than I've explained, but still, I overall, it's not a positive.
Do you expect more price cuts, Machine? You used Tesla prices before to predict successfully Tesla's upcoming price cuts. Do you expect the same now that we're seeing another leg down in used Tesla prices?
Um, Maybe I definitely expect adjustments in motivating buyers, and I was hoping, and what we're seeing recently is that they could get to a point where they're not using the brute force, blunt object, cut the price for everyone effect, and become more nuanced with, hey, some people are still willing to buy this car for this price. Some other people might not be. Instead of cutting the price for everyone, can we do things to subtly motivate some people, incentivize some people, for instance, offering lower APR financing, where some people may are paying cash and still will pay the same price, or incentivizing with these FSD transfers or supercharger benefits. I think all these things ultimately, if you, they're probably more work for Tesla than taking the easy way out, but they will ultimately save them money. And because people value things like free supercharging, though they value that higher than the actual cost to Tesla, um, you know, and those things I think do work, and we're seeing that now. So I'm hoping that they don't really have to cut prices too much in lieu of that, and I'm happier with what they're doing right now.
Thank you. Omar, I see that you posted a post by Hertz. Hertz said that used vehicle prices fell 10% in the quarter, which resulted in depreciation per unit of its gas-powered fleet rising to $350 a month from $282 a month. Hertz interest expense soared to $91 a vehicle in the fourth quarter, up from $55 in Q4. Would you like to elaborate on this, Omar?
Yeah, I just think it's important to remember that Tesla now at scale is part of the broader car market. And a lot of times I kind of hear people talking about Tesla in a vacuum as if, you know, they don't exist as part of the car market. So, okay, Tesla used prices decline, but okay, how much did they decline compared to the gas car fleet? So, Hertz did earnings yesterday. They said their gas car fleet saw prices fall 10%. So, car market prices as a whole are falling for a number of reasons, including high financing expenses, record high inventories for the last few years, and factors like that. So, all cars are a substitute for each other. You may want a Tesla, but okay, there's a car here for, let's say, $300 a month, and the Tesla's $500 a month. You may not have, maybe you need to spend that money on your student loans or something, so you just pick the cheaper car. You may want a new Tesla, but okay, maybe I'm going to get a used one because of the price or something like that. So all cars are kind of competing with each other. And what happens elsewhere in the market can have an impact. If there's a lot of Fords and they're piling up on inventory lots and the dealers are really discounting them aggressively to get rid of them, then you kind of have to, compete in that market. And it's definitely been a very volatile auto market the last few years.
Thank you. Sawyer, I posted your tweet about a new charging deal. Would you like to tell us more about it?
Yeah, sure. So in the past, we've seen Tesla announce, or I guess the hotels announce partnerships with Tesla to offer destination or wall connector chargers at their hotels. And we've got another one today. Choice Hotels announced an agreement with Tesla to offer Tesla universal wall connectors at participating Radisson, Cambria, Comfort, and Country Inn suites. And it sounds like most of their uh, hotels are based in the US. I think there'll be over like 7,500 hotels or something, or locations that should have these chargers. Um, so it's great. More chargers out there, the better, honestly.
That's great news indeed. Do you have any other news that you'd like to share with us today?
Well, obviously, we got news last night. I actually, so I went to my Twin Birch account and I was scrolling under my tweets because wanted to see what kind of ads were displaying under my tweets, and then I noticed a Tesla ad. I was like, oh my god, I guess they're advertising in the U.S. now. So, that's why I made that tweet last night or post. It's an interesting strategy. They last week we noticed they started advertising in Japan on X, which makes a lot of sense, I think. Even though I think a lot of people are just under the assumption that, well, Elon's on X, everyone knows about Elon on X, and thus they all know about Tesla on X. That's just simply not true. You cannot apply what the situation in the US abroad to every other country. Japan specifically, they have the second most users of any other country on X, but they have very bad awareness of not only the Tesla brand, but they don't pay attention to the same Elon stuff that we do in the US. And like Elon said on the Q4 earnings call, a lot of his friends tell him, like, there's really no brand awareness of Tesla at all in Japan, and the market share is quite low compared to other players. So I think it makes sense to target that market. I don't know. It doesn't make as much sense to target the US market, but I think they just want to gather data and see how people respond to it, which I think is a good strategy for now.
Thank you. Machine?
It really goes to show you how poor, how poorly targeted advertising is. If Tesla is putting ads to a non-human clothing company, and the clothing company is one that makes you want to wear twigs around your body, I don't really understand it, but I just think it's not effective.
Some valid criticisms.
I think this should really calm Gary Black's nerves. He's been asking for a big advertising campaign, and I think if we spend 20 billion on X this year, we could really educate a lot of people.
I keep hearing this narrative that why doesn't Tesla advertise? We're slowly seeing them expand it. It's maybe not to the level that a lot of people want, but you can't go out there and be like Tesla isn't advertising. They're advertising on Google Ads, on YouTube, on X now. They'll probably expand to Instagram just like SpaceX has with Starlink. So, just give them time to see because they haven't ever
Yeah,
advertised in their entire life, company life. Like they don't know what works, what, things to target. They're all figuring this out as they go.
I did hear that they had also started advertising on Facebook. So we'd seen Google and YouTube. I think YouTube is a great place to show their video ads. They've got 500 ads running in the US market alone. You can go to Google's ad transparency tool and look at them. Now they're expanding into Facebook. I could, print and TV, I'm not sure anyone really sees those, but it's maybe something they could experiment with, try and measure the ROI. But I think they're going to make the right moves. And what they've done so far with YouTube and social media, I think, is a pretty good start.
The great thing with online advertising is it's really easy to track the metrics and the performance of your ads, whereas TV it's harder. So I think that's why they're just starting out with just simple online ads first.
Machine?
Speaking of making the right moves, that's what your mom said I did last night.
That's gonna come out in the edit, I think. Um, Before we move on, we have right now 2 people with Apple Vision Pro, and I'd love to hear more about that. Um, but before that, quick reminder: 1,000 subscribers on YouTube will get me to be able to add chapters to my videos, live stream X Spaces on YouTube, and invest into better equipment and editing tools. So we all benefit. So if you could please go up to the top of your screens and subscribe to Value Analyst 1 on YouTube, I would appreciate it. All right. We have Sawyer and Omar, both have Apple Vision Pro. And I would love to hear about your experiences. What were your expectations going into delivery, taking delivery? What is your experience now after you took delivery? And have you experienced Apple Vision Pro with your Teslas?
No, it's funny that like a Vision Pro costs 1/10 what a brand new Model Y rear-wheel drive costs in the US. It's pretty funny. Um, I think the reality of my experience fit the expectations of what I thought it would be. In that it is one of the most, if not the most, single impressive piece of tech I've ever used. but also I find myself struggling to sort of come up with an idea of like what I will use this thing for long term that I can't already do that's good enough on, like, let's say a laptop or an iPhone, that's worth justifying the $3,500 cost. The productivity side of it is more impressive and useful than I thought it would be, but I don't find myself wanting to do breaking news through a VR headset right now. But I will say it's like it's really immersive. Like the immersive videos are. It feels like you're actually in the room with Alicia Keys singing next to you. It's that crazy. The audio quality is really good. I mean, you have two displays the size of a postage stamp, with 23 million pixels on a micro OLED display, which is like extremely difficult technology to put into something so small. Apple's been working on this for 7 years. Um, so it's a really impressive thing. I just don't. I think I'll end up returning it just because I don't find myself foreseeing using it in my daily life, which I feel like for that price, I kind of want that, but I also feel like it's with the second or third gen, Apple's going to hit a sweet spot in terms of, I think, price and weight, and the app's ecosystem will be way more built out. Which I don't. There's only 600 apps compatible and were built custom for this Vision Pro, which to some people might sound like a lot, but it's not when you consider how many apps are on the iPhone App Store or the iPad App Store. Spotify, Netflix, they don't support this thing yet. YouTube doesn't either. But I think once they do, it'll be a better value proposition. But I just don't think it's worth the $3,500 right now.
Machine and then Omar.
Like most forms of technology, at first there's a lot of resistance and eventually acceptance. And I think this will eventually go that way. I think there's going to be a lot of use cases, especially inside the home. I've already seen these demos with someone watching 5 NBA games at the same time. Um, there's all sorts of stuff that I think would be really cool. However, I will say, as an old person, seeing these videos of people walking outside doing gestures while wearing these goggles is infuriating. I find these to be the biggest douchebags I've ever seen in my entire life. And if I see one of these people on a hiking trail trying to like play Pokemon Go with their goggles, they're not going to come out of the woods alive.
I will say, having used the Vision Pro, there are certain things that I've seen in those videos that you can't actually do in the Vision Pro. Like you can't type with multiple fingers at once. You can only point and touch one key at a time. So that dude that was like on the train typing with all of his fingers, he's just completely trolling people.
Omar, what's your experience so far?
Yeah, I could probably talk about this for hours. I think Farzad and Sawyer and I are going to do a longer podcast, but I agree with a lot of Sawyer's points. It's silly, it's useless, it's sometimes painful, sometimes nauseating, but also just incredible. And there's a lot of things that they really got right, and a lot of things that are still incredibly half baked. Like, for example, typing with one finger. I mean, you should see me like trying to type anything. It's like such an exercise in frustration. You just feel so stupid because you're like, I could take my phone out and type this in 1 second, but instead I'm like trying to type it. The amount of like false inputs and false taps and stuff like that is kind of insane. But there really is something here, so I- not in this product iteration, but I think in future iterations. So the idea is essentially you have like this 3D space around you, and you can sort of orient these apps around you. And then instead of having to, switch apps on your phone, you can essentially just sort of turn your head, look at the app. You can make it sort of bigger than any TV you have. It's, when I think about like the future paradigm of computing, it probably looks more in that direction where I can just have a pair of glasses or something like that I put on, and I can see these interfaces overlaid over my world. And the input method with computer vision, where I can just sort of wave my hand and control these apps, is really cool. I could see us moving into a world where that becomes more of a primary computing interface compared to the phones that we use today.
Did you guys own Quest 2 before or other products?
I do, yeah. But I always, it was always you try it, it goes in a drawer after a week, and you'd never turn it on again.
Do you think this will be different?
For me, so far, I've been trying it every day and trying to use it. I was just using it right before this. But I agree with Sawyer that I'll probably end up returning it just because it's, I don't know, it's just a little stupid.
What about comfort? Before I go to Wes, last question. What about the comforts of wearing it? Like when you wear it for hours and hours, do you feel any more comfortable than the previous products?
Less comfortable.
Wow. Okay, Wes?
I was wondering if you noticed any type of latency or rendering artifacts like blurring or kind of macro blocking or any type of thing that kind of pulls you out of the experience.
The head tracking is absolutely incredible. I mean, you move your head, you tilt your head, you look around, and it looks just like, it tracks exactly. The app interfaces and everything, they track exactly. If you move your head, there's motion blur. That's one of the worst things about it is everything gets kind of blurry when you move your head. That kind of
Yes.
takes you out of the experience. That's why I think they've really oriented it towards stationary use. They make the windows stay there. You can't really move it around. They really want you to use this in one place. And then you got that big battery hanging out with the wire. It's really geared towards that stationary use case right now because of the technical limitations.
The latency is 12 milliseconds, so you can play ping pong or whatever, like Marquez showed. There's really no issue there.
The latency, there's no perceptible delay. You can move your hand, it looks just like you're looking through it. And the other thing is the perspective is exactly spot on. You take those glasses off your head and you are seeing the same exact thing, if that makes any sense. So that they did really well. But one of the really weak points is the pass through. It basically is just like a background instead of one of the, environments. You have this sort of camera image, but it just looks kind of blurry. It looks kind of low resolution. When you're in the dark, it gets sort of grainy. It definitely looks like a camera image. That's the one thing that really sort of breaks the illusion. And there's no sort of like occlusion tracking or anything. So, like, for example, if I put a window behind my couch, it just shows up in front of the couch. It has no idea that like the couch is there because they're trying to minimize latency. If I put it in a room and shut the door, it doesn't have like any idea about that. So the pass through is definitely one of the weak points on the device where if they improved the resolution of the cameras, they reduced the motion blur and they improved that, then it could actually be wearable for a much longer amount of time, I think.
Another issue with the pass through is that, on your iPhone, the iPhone covers like 93+% of the P3 wide color gamut, whereas in the Vision Pro, the pass through is only 55%. So the outside world looks very muted from a color standpoint.
Yeah, exactly. It's not like horrible. You kind of get used to it, but it really breaks the illusion. So that could be an easy thing for a Gen 2 that if they improved, I think would just dramatically improve the experience.
I think go
Yeah,
ahead.
oh, sorry. I was just going to say, I looked up the refresh rate. It says it's 100. I would think that in order for it to not have, very detectable motion blur, it would need to be somewhere in the 240 range.
Yeah, I think it can get up to like 96 or something, but in terms of like the front-facing display, I think that's totally unnecessary. I think it adds cost, weight, complexity. I think if you get rid of that, and Alex Torville and I were talking about, you could even maybe get rid of the glass on the front of that thing and just do some sort of, plastic, and then just cover the camera lenses with some like sapphire like they do in the iPhones. This would just bring down the weight and cost quite tremendously, I would think, because you don't need that. The eyes look terrible on the front-facing display. And it's a pretty useless feature in my opinion. I don't need to know that someone is, dialed into a movie or something. Like they have the thing on. I know they're in it. Like I don't need to see their eyes. So I get what they were trying to do, but I think that's one way to really bring down the cost in the future.
Yeah, I totally agree. Philosophically, it's interesting because you have a camera pass through out of the device, and they have a camera pass through into the device. So it's kind of simulating the product that they want to build, but it's really kind of overusing technology at a great cost to compensate for having to use this camera display. I think where this could really get interesting is if you could have some sort of like transparent OLED display where you could just sort of overlay the app interface and allow optical light to just pass through naturally. Then you could maybe really have something that is pretty compelling and makes you a lot less sort of sick wearing it for long periods.
Meta.
On the pass-through thing, I think that was one of the reasons why the Google Glass failed, because people discovered indoors it works great because you have a lot of artificial light. But when you go outdoors or you're looking at anything that has the sun's light reflected off of it, the photon count is just so high, it washes anything else out. And you'd have to use a tremendous amount of power to get to compete with natural light. I think they tried using sunglasses and various other approaches, but it just I think even with that, you're now just muting the rest of it. So it doesn't quite work. Whereas the pass through kind of works a little bit better there. And of course, the R1 chip is just, they're doing a phenomenal job there. And the other thing to remember is like, even though this is the first version of the hardware, it's also the first version of the software. So when I was looking at some of the videos, I thought, when you're in a room, right, and you have the headset on and you're working on like, say a vehicle model, and someone else is in the same room and they're working on the vehicle model. Right now you get two different instances. In the future, they could very easily make it so that you're working on the same instance. So you can imagine like, okay, molding, various other things, like how expensive is it to like, build out the first prototypes of things. There could be a lot of applications, but I agree that it's probably going to be very niche in the beginning.
I think one way to make this technology less isolated or dystopian feeling is that if you were to have the ability to connect like headsets together, like let's say you have a long distance relationship and you want to watch the same movie, that you could do that. Or if you want to bring all your friends over, you could all play the same first person shooter game, but with all just different headsets, but they'd all be linked together and have basically virtually no latency. I think that's one way to make it more interactive and less, isolated.
I think going over the internet will be your hardest part there,
Yeah.
but in person in the same place on 1080 108N, it's probably doable now with Wi-Fi these days. So I think it's possible, and the way the headset's built, I wouldn't be surprised if that comes. I just think, if I'm very honest about it, I think they did a really, really good job on the software and the hardware. The expectations are really high for Apple to start with, and I think they at least met those expectations, in my opinion.
This is a
Yeah,
really good product for a first gen. I'll say that.
yeah, I kind of love it, even though it's kind of stupid and useless, and it doesn't really make any sense to use it for anything. I'm kind of drawn to it because there's something there. And Sawyer makes a great point. One of the nicest things about it is watching movies or 3D movies. I kind of never like pay attention to movies anymore because I'm always looking at X on my phone. So I found it was like this kind of immersive experience where you can really focus on the movie and you can watch the movies in 3D. It looks really amazing in 3D. They have a great selection of 3D movies. Apple made this immersive content. But to Sawyer's point, you've got this great 3D movie viewing experience, amazing on a plane or something like that, but you have to watch it alone. So, where's the fun in that? It really kind of limits the potential. But one thing that I'd be interested to hear what you guys like about it who have used it. One thing that I really liked is just leaving open multiple apps and windows just all around you and leaving an app in a room. Like for example, I could take my Dyson app and put it over my Dyson fan. So every time I see the fan, I'm near it, I can then just click on it and control it. And I had I'm working on something, I have my MacBook display open, I'm editing, but I can also throw open the Tesla app on the side, and it's not taking up any room on my display, but I can just sort of glance over to the side and I can see that Tesla app. So I'm like, wow, this is a really interesting experience now where I could actually just sort of leave applications where I want them, leave the timer by the kitchen, whatever, and actually just move around physically rather than having to switch apps on my phone. There's kind of this illusion that they're in physical space.
The
Yes.
fixed window tracking is incredible in that, like, you have a window open, that thing does not budge. It's not jiggling around. You can walk around that thing, and it's almost as if it's actually in there in real life.
Yeah, I think the demo from MKBHD in the subway, I've seen it work for some people in the subway. I've not tried it in a subway, but it shows you how it is actually geo-locked as well. So that's really impressive because you can't do that with GPS alone. You can't even do it with GPS plus Wi-Fi alone. So they must be using, you know, visual cues plus those signals so that they're doing multiple
I mean, the
sensor fusion.
accelerometers and the gyroscope probably too.
Correct. Oh, yeah, yeah. Sorry. But you get the point, right? They're doing sensor fusion. So what's interesting about this to me is it kind of is showing like, just like Waymo had to do sensor fusion, Apple's shown a really good skill here in sensor fusion. They've shown really good skill on the chipset side. So, they've kind of jumped ahead in if like they were to say we're releasing a car before the Vision Pro and after the Vision Pro, I believe that it's possible they could get self-driving faster, not saying before others, but just faster than before they release this. So that's one thing. And then the second thing to me is the spatial computing is actually really complex because when you leave the room and you put different windows all over the place, it has to basically figure out when to offload apps to make it feel as if you have infinite memory, but you don't actually have infinite memory. So that's a really cool piece of the spatial computing software. And so that operating system that they're building, as the hardware improves, as everything changes, that operating system itself is actually pretty complicated to build. So the big kudos to them to getting that right, in my opinion.
Meta, did you get one?
I did not get one, but I have tried one. I tried it in guest mode though.
Why aren't you getting one?
I have considered it. I only could justify it if I was actually going to make apps for it, and I can't really justify the time right now. I'm
I
I'm
think I'm
I'm
gonna
not.
return it and then end up buying another one probably later.
I was going to say I'm not ruling it out yet. I might try to buy them from folks who didn't return it in the return window and they're selling it used. That might be where I can justify the cost.
Yeah, I went to the Apple Store last night, and very rarely do you have a first gen product from Apple where you can just show up to the store that day without any reservations and just buy it. And you could last night.
That's what happened to me, Sawyer. I was just going there. I went there at 8 a.m. on the day it launched and there was nobody there. I said, "Hey, do you have any? Can I buy one?" They said, "Sure." I'm like, "All right, well, that's too tempting. I got to try it."
Yeah, that's crazy. I was
And this
in
is
my
this is San Francisco.
yeah, right. Of all places, you think Silicon Valley would, yeah. And it's interestingly at the Apple Store where I was last night, the guy who was helping me out happened to be a follower of mine. He was like telling me about how all the Apple employees there own Teslas. He's like, this guy owns a Model Y Performance. This dude owns a Model 3 rear wheel drive. I'm like, that's fucking sweet that all of them own Teslas.
Yeah,
Meta, how far do you see the price declining? Sorry,
in the
you can't just say what you have to say and then answer my question if you want.
I had a different question, so I'll answer your question first. I Are you talking about like the secondary market price, or are you talking about the primary?
Primary in a couple of years.
Hard to gauge, but my guess, when I was looking at the teardown video from Jerry Rig Everything, it looks like it's actually pretty complicated to manufacture. Wes could probably answer this better than me, but like the manufacturing of that seems pretty high. The uh, you know, I forget the exact terms. It's like EV1, DV1. There's like different stages of design for phones. And I know the pricing on those, the first few phones you make can be like the first phone is like 3 million bucks or something like that. And the price comes down over time, but when you're making them by hand, it can be quite expensive. So they have a lot of R&D, they have all that. But I also personally think one of the reasons why the price is probably really high is precisely to make people use it. I think if you keep it past the 10-day window, you're going to have a psychological desire to keep using it, to keep checking on it, and developers will make apps for them and you'll start using them. So I think at least all the Quest developers will easily move over. I can't see why you wouldn't port all your stuff over to Apple. It's a pretty big brand. It's going to stick around for a while, most likely. So, um, in terms of like how much the cost comes down, probably a lot. How much the price comes down, probably not that much. Maybe they come down to 3,000. Like, remember when they raised the prices for phones from 600-700 bucks to 1,000 to $1,200. Everybody thought this is way too expensive, but Apple does this, and Apple makes the market price, and then the market eventually complies. And I think 3,000 is not crazy if it replaces your desktop computer, your TV, and all those devices. I think it's okay. It's a reasonable price.
There was a report a couple months ago that long term, Apple wants to make a cheaper version of this and have the price be around $1,500. It's sort of unknown what kind of compromises they would have to make to get to that price, but I imagine quite a few.
Or the volume would have to be insane.
Yeah, right. Economies of scale. Yeah.
I mean, don't you guys think that Apple Vision Pro implies that there's going to be Apple Vision, just like iPhone Pro, iPhone?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if they reduce the cost of the display, it would take away from the experience dramatically, and that would probably be the biggest monetary driver, is my understanding. Or like the most expensive
Yeah.
thing is probably the inside screen.
How many people have bought Quest 2?
I don't know the answer off the top of my head. We could Google it.
I think it's like between 10 and 30 million in those in that ballpark, I think. I could be wrong. Just or
It's
maybe
all
it's just
kids
all of
though.
VRs.
I went into the metaverse and it's like, oh my god, everyone here is 5. I'm literally talking to 5-year-olds. They're like, "Bleh, bleh." It's like, wow, this is probably not really a place where I want to hang out. The parents are like, hey, shut up, kid. Put on this VR headset. Go play Beat Saber.
I think also
Any
Quest 2 is not a direct competitor. Even though it's in a similar-ish space, I think Apple's really coming at it from a perspective of work. And what I really like about the strategy is it looks like they're going after, back in the day, Apple versus Windows, the big differentiator used to be if you were an artist, a musician, a designer, you use the Apple product. And I can totally see how sorry, not Quest, Apple Vision Pro could be for people who are graphic designers, 3D designers, musicians, various other things to actually do something because those are the IDEs that tend to be super complex. There's a lot of buttons everywhere. Imagine if you could actually just have like a studio where you're making the sound in a 3D space as opposed to trying to fit everything into your tiny, software screen.
I think you're right in that Meta has geared their devices more towards gamers and, metaverse type experiences, whereas Apple's more towards, I think, entertainment and productivity style things. They might get into gaming more, but certainly in their marketing materials and during the presentation, they didn't really talk all that much about gaming.
Yeah, to go into gaming would mean they would have to probably change the screen, in my opinion, because I don't know if you guys experienced it, but there's a lot of motion blur and Uh, I haven't tested this, so I was testing it indoors, but did either of you have experience watching fast-moving things on the screen?
Yeah, it was perfectly fine, honestly.
Yeah,
Uh,
everything looks really sharp. Every app, everything, it looks, you know, incredibly sharp. There's no problems with, fast moving things or anything like that. But yeah, it's really interesting to contrast the Oculus and the Apple device. They're very different devices. And the Apple device definitely feels more, it's very different. It's more geared towards computing, whereas Oculus is more geared towards gaming. Oculus has 2 controllers. Apple, you use your hands. The Apple device is definitely more seamless, right? So I put on the Oculus and I get in and it goes. So first of all, like the last time I tried to turn it on, one of my controllers wasn't connecting. So I was like, huh? Only one of my hands is popping up. So I just took it off. I was like, whatever. I can't even figure out how to open any of these apps. But then, it goes, okay, create your boundary. So then you got to like create this boundary so that you don't walk into a wall while you're playing a game. And then it's always asking you to adjust the boundary. You go into a different room. Now you got to draw a new boundary. It's like, this is fucking stupid, right? And then you're playing the game and you constantly see that boundary thing popping up like, hey, you're going to walk into a wall. The way Apple's done it is much more seamless, right? They just kind of fade in everything. There's no setting up a boundary, there's no setting up a controller. You just put it on and use it.
yeah, the other thing I would just say from like a computational perspective, I think an interesting trade-off here is if you don't go after gaming intentionally and you go after things like Candy Crush or like mobile gaming style gaming, then you don't have to have as much compute power. And from the presentation I'm trying to recall, I don't think there was that much dedicated compute to like graphic rendering. A lot of it's pass-through, right? So the pass-through stuff is very different from, creating the visuals and then overlaying those visuals. Obviously, they're doing that for the immersive video, but that's pre-computed versus dynamically being computed. So I think that might be one of the ways that they actually are making a trade-off.
I mean, it's got an M2 in there. It's a pretty powerful chip, and I took everything off. I took the light seal off. I took the headband off, and I looked at it, and you can really see how close they are to a pair of glasses. It's really not that far away.
Do you know if the M2 does vector processing?
I
Oh,
think so. Yeah,
yeah, you're right. It has matrix multiplication. Yeah, they call it matrix multipliers. Yeah,
it
never
has
mind.
a
I take
neural
it back.
engine in there. You
Yeah,
can
yeah,
hardware accelerate inference on that chip.
you're correct.
Wes, are you there?
Question. Yeah, I'm here.
What do you think about Apple Vision Pro? Meta said you might have some insight into manufacturing the Apple Vision Pro, the cost of it, and maybe eventual prices.
I haven't seen a teardown, so I don't know the BOM. I actually don't know what all the sensors are in it. I don't know if they've die shrunk anything. I don't know if the chip is the core or if it's the die. I don't know how many boards are in there. I haven't seen how many different screws are in there, if something could be automated or not. I don't know how many different pieces of glass there are. Those are kind of like the major components that I can think of off
Wes,
the
I'll
top
send
of
you a
my head.
video that does a teardown of all that.
Oh, that'd be great. I'm happy to look at that more in depth and see what's going on there. I find it hard to believe that they've targeted productivity, but maybe I find that just to be strange. I also find it strange that they might be trying to replace your desktop. That also seems strange. It seems to me like if I was developing a roadmap for this, in 5 years, I would be targeting something that can replace your sunglasses, or just glasses in general, so that you can always have, kind of second vision. But this first product, honestly, it's just not interesting to me. And much of the same lines that Omar pointed out, it just, I don't know what I'd do with it. I think it's interesting to have like this big 3D display, but strapped to my face is not something that I would enjoy.
All right.
I'm happy being immersed in audio.
Okay, great. Thank you. Griffin, so I hear that you also have a Apple Vision Pro. Would you like to share your experience?
Yeah, I got one on the release day, and one thing I've been fascinated by is how good the movie watching experience is. I found myself sitting on the couch and watching a movie, both 3D and 2D, on my wall, taking up the entire wall, overlaying my $4,000 OLED panel, and then when I go back to the OLED TV, it's like, why would I ever watch a movie on this $4,000 TV when I can watch it 100 inches and it looks just as good or way better, especially in 3D. And so for me, like I know the price is hard to swallow, but for me, like that's worth it alone. And I think as far as the productivity stuff, I think there's a lot of room for that to improve. But yesterday I spent half my day working, forcing myself to work with that. And there was a lot of things like Omar said, you can have all your apps just laid out and turn around, and it's like having like almost unlimited display space. And the way that you open up your MacBook and it just pops up a little bubble above the display and you just tap it and all of a sudden you got a 4K display that you can resize at any, there's a lot of value there. I think as far as comfort, the the cool fancy single band that comes with it is definitely not comfortable after, like, for me, like after an hour it like started hurting my forehead. So I switched to the dual band, the dual strap one, and it's way more comfortable. It doesn't look as cool, it messes up your hair, but it's definitely way more comfortable. And I found I could go 2 hours with that with no comfort issues. So yeah, and as far as the pass through, the lighting has a big effect on it. If the lighting in your room is even just moderate, you it breaks the illusion because everything looks crystal clear that's being generated, but the pass through looks kind of like you're looking through a camera. But if the lighting's really good in the room, it actually fools the brain and you really think you're just looking through glass. But the lighting has to be like perfect, like really bright for that effect. So I think once they improve the cameras and they're able to do the low light much better, they're going to be able to fix those issues where like Omar said, it's breaking the illusion.
Yeah,
You know,
that's been a big issue for me too, is the low light. I find myself
right?
having to like turn on lights, especially at night that I normally wouldn't turn on. I'm like turning on extra lamps. I'm getting like table lamps because I'm watching the movie and I can see like my hand flickering in and out of existence in the bottom as sort of like the hand detection detects it and, fails to detect it because of the low light. So it's definitely a little distracting. You've got this great 100-inch movie, like you said. It's a great experience, but then out of the corner of your eye, you see your hand flickering in and out of existence. It's a little bit confusing and maybe concerning. So then you kind of have to put it under a blanket or something so that that doesn't happen.
Let the world record state Omar puts his hand under blankets while watching movies.
Omar, Alex asked earlier if you bought the Climax cloth as well.
Climax cloth? What is that?
Sawyer knows what it is. Sawyer?
Yeah, it's $100 Climax cloth. You don't know about that, bro?
It came with a cloth in the box. Are we still talking about the Vision Pro?
I think so. Meta, did you have one?
It wasn't mine, and I didn't ask them if they bought a Climax cloth. I didn't know such a thing existed.
Well, it's by far the top trending search result for Apple Vision Pro right now. So if anyone knows what it is, please come up because I don't either.
Yeah, I did watch Finding Nemo this morning in 3D. It was very emotional. This guy just loves his son Nemo. He gets taken away. Um, so if you want to watch Finding Nemo in 3D for just $3,500, you can do it.
3,510 probably, right? You gotta pay for the movie.
Honestly, like if you're into tech and you have 3,500, or even you can like return it, it's worth checking out because it's just fucking cool. If you're like into gadgets and shit, like this is a peek at the future. Is it a little half baked? Yes, but there really is something in this direction.
Yeah, for a while back when the Quest first came out, actually, no, I think it was Oculus. There was these mixed reality experiences that started popping up, and I thought those were pretty cool. It's like kind of like a museum. You walk through it, and they had things placed in different locations, or three-dimensional art you would walk through, and that never really took off because I think the creation of it was really hard, or whatever the case was. But what I find interesting with the Apple Vision Pro is because they're partnering with Disney right off the bat, Disney having giant theme parks, you can imagine, at least for some companies, a lot of use cases where they could use this to really reduce their manufacturing cost, to just see how things are going to lay out, how things are going to get built out. So I know Wes is saying he doesn't necessarily see this as a productivity tool, but I could see like AutoCAD, music. I think there's a lot of spaces where this could take off. And if I recall correctly, even like the Google Glass at some point was being used by Boeing, I want to say. One of the airplane companies.
Wes,
Is there like a common agreement among people that there is one killer app at least? Maybe it's the movie viewing experience.
I personally liked the and I realize it's not a full-fledged app yet, but the demos with the car, even seeing that in person, a little bit buggy, but it was good.
The killer app is the Apple ecosystem. I can load my messages, my mail, my photos, my Safari, my music. I can go on the App Store. With minimal effort, developers can sort of port it compared to learning a brand new platform like the MetaQuest. It's kind of like a new compilation target. You can reuse a lot of the same code that you have for iOS. I can run X out of the box without them doing anything. So I'm actually wearing it right now. I've got X open and I can scroll it just by moving my fingers. I can push another button, I can open the Tesla app. And there's some cool apps in there. There's like a DJ app where you can actually like get a physical turntable and it kind of simulates that. You can there's one app where it shows like your local airport and they show all the planes like landing and taking off in real time. So I think the best killer apps have really yet to be created. But the reason why it's so much more interesting to me and I think has been so much more enduring than the Oculus is like the Oculus I put on and I was like, I really want to use this. It's cool, but I truly cannot figure out what to do. I don't care that much about games. I just don't know what to do with this thing. But with the Apple, I'm actually finding that I can do things in there because of the Apple ecosystem.
Did you get a headache when you used the Quest?
Not really, but maybe over like really long periods.
Okay. Yeah, I was just curious. There's some folks who have like motion sensitivity, and I haven't really heard if those people have tried it and seen a difference.
I looked up Climax cloth. I had to do some digging around, but apparently it's for polishing your hardware. If you want to polish your hardware, you could get the Climax cloth. $19.
I would say the other killer app, Wes, is if you take a video with your phone and then you watch it in there yourself, uh, that's pretty impressive. So I can imagine the killer app being your kid's walking video recorded in a three-dimensional space that you can go watch later on. Eventually, you can imagine like they could use AI to use a voxel space and you could like walk around in places that the video didn't even record. So I think these killer apps are going to get bigger.
That's the thing is like with generative AI, there's some really exciting possibilities here, right? You could say, okay, redecorate my room and have stable diffusion, re-render your room in real time. You could, so I had an app idea yesterday. We were talking it over. Give sight to the blind. So you simply take the cameras on the device, which move along with your head, and you combine it with like the GPT-4 Vision API or even theoretically like some vision model that could be inferenced on the device in the future. But you combine it with like the ChatGPT Vision API, and you simply allow a blind person to ask questions about what they're seeing in front of them. I mean, that could be a fucking killer app for someone who doesn't know how to see, and they can just put this thing on their face, and maybe a little bit bulky, but they could say, "Hey, what's going on in front of me?" They could ask any question, and it could probably answer it pretty well. So I think there's some really interesting possibilities with AI that they haven't even really started to scratch the surface of.
I think one of the hardest parts is the nose piece. If they start making custom pieces or third parties start making custom pieces that fit your face a little bit better, it could get a lot more comfortable.
One quick note from in the replies, Griffin says the killer app for me is recording my 2-year-old son in 3D and reliving those moments in immersion mode. It's so realistic, unbelievable, and you can record spatial videos on an iPhone Pro 15, so you don't need to wear the headset to record. There you go. Xander.
Hey, I got a question. Wouldn't this be enhanced with some kind of haptics? And is Apple working on it, or is this going to be?
I don't think
Ford
there's
earnings are
anything.
out.
Oh, go ahead.
Well, I don't want to take away from the conversation, but I was just mentioning that Ford earnings just came out.
Yeah, I think we could switch, but in general, my understanding is you could easily pair something with these devices, and there'll be third-party things where you could maybe wear gloves. I think if we look at this Apple launch and say this is complete and this is all it's going to be, we're making a big mistake. It reminds me of when the Nintendo Switch came out. There's a few sensors in there that they didn't even tell people were there, and then they launched like the Nintendo Cardboard, surface, and then people realized there was a whole bunch of sensors in the devices that they didn't call out at first. So I think there's going to be creative uses, and Apple has shown that they stick to a product, even like the watch and various other things that maybe didn't do so well in the first generation. So I think the hardest hurdle is getting developers to commit. And because there have been gold rushes in the past, I can see developers actually committing and making the ecosystem better.
Yeah, I mean, I think this really is the future. I got my X app open here, and I'm moving around it just by moving my hands. I don't have any device in my hands. My hands are free to do whatever I want, and I can just manipulate these apps just by not using a mouse or using a touch screen, but by these cameras actually looking at my hand and interpreting my gestures, looking at my eyes. Like, that's the other thing we didn't talk about is the eye tracking. How you just click on something just by basically looking at it. Your eyes are the mouse essentially. So I mean it's silly, it's useless, but at the same time, this is what the future of computing is going to look like, I think. When the whole world is your canvas and you can just sort of use natural gestures and speech to interact with your apps rather than, physical touch or a mouse. I think that is probably the direction we're going to go just because of the potential of sort of making the whole world your canvas.
Jimmy and then Meta.
So you guys said that the device is really good with the ecosystem, but next year I think Apple's ecosystem is going to change because they announced RCS. They also have to open up a third-party app store in the EU. Eventually, there's going to be laws in the United States that say they have to open up there. So what do you guys think the ecosystem is going to look like for this device? Because me personally, with the information that I'm receiving from people, I'll probably never buy an Apple device once RCS is open and once I can load like a third-party store. I'll probably just move on to Android. One, because it's cheaper, but two, because I don't need to worry about iMessage groups anymore.
So on the RCS front, RCS will not get all the features of iMessage. And my understanding is they're still going to keep the color differentiation between RCS and iMessage. You'll just have longer text messages and images, the higher resolution images across devices. But things like, bumping to exchange contacts or airdropping, various other differentiators will still continue to exist. Granted, there is a bunch of differentiators on the other side, like the circle to search thing was pretty cool, but there is there's still going to be a bit of a differentiation. But when we talk about like the advantages here, they're using Swift, right? And that their programming languages already exists. It's not like you have to go learn a brand new language. There's probably a little bit of extension, obviously, to using spatial computing versus mobile computing. But for the folks that weren't using a, you know, a wrapper that eventually built for two operating systems, the ones that were like actually building for iPhone platform, they're probably gonna have a pretty easy time extending their existing skill set to develop for Apple Vision Pro. Whereas with Quest, you kind of had to learn something new.
Yeah, I don't think any of the things you mentioned have anything to do with the Apple ecosystem. Like, I'm just talking about the fact that the apps are available, that everything integrates. Whether it's iMessage or RCS doesn't make a difference. I'm opening the Messages app. It has all my messages, it has all my text messages. The software runs on the device. They have developers who develop for their platforms. That's really what I'm talking about. So, you know, the App Store or RCS and that kind of stuff is completely relevant to the strength of the device's ecosystem.